live. Yes. Welcome to yet another edition of PCS Impact Q&A. I'm your host, MJ Boyce. I'm the Director of Community Outreach here at PCS Grades. Boom. Unfortunately, Megan is out just this last time. She will be back next week, but she had to take care of some family business. We all know Murphy can strike at any time, but she's got that, and we've got her back. So, Megan, if you're watching, shout out. We miss you, and we'll see you next week. Because, y'all, Megan is our resident PCS reform advocate. She is our resident DA, censored for little ears in your room, because we love you. That lovely lady that you just heard cracking up to my left, right, depending which way you're watching this, is Michelle Norman. She's the founder of Partners in Promise, and she is our guest today. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about yourself. But first, before we do that, I'm going to go down and talk about those housekeeping items like we do every week. All right? Ready, set, here we go. All right, y'all. We've got the answers. And if we don't know those answers, guess what? We know who does. And if we don't know either of those things, we're going to take your questions for action and get back to you with an answer. Speaking of questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, shout outs, go ahead and leave those in the comments section below. And you might be entered to win some Hope Design Limited bling. Yes. Again, questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, shout outs. LOL smiley faces are absolutely encouraged, but don't count as an entry to win, y'all. Next up, we bring the experts to you. Experts like our favorite education expert here, Michelle Norman. Experts like U.S. Transportation Command. Experts like military spouse employment advocates and industry moving professionals. We bring these experts to you because they are the source. You ask their question in real time, they are the source. But sometimes you're going to run into a situation that is specific to you and your military family. And in those specific instances, your two forever and always resources will be, number one, your local chain of command. Number two, your local transportation office. Those are the people who know you. Those are the people who are dealing with your stuff. Those are the people who could take your issues and further them for action. Of course, you always got PCS Grades at the helm. You can come to PCSgrades.com to read and leave reviews on your on-base housing, off-base neighborhoods, movers, schools, and so much more. We've also got area guides for those of you who are researching your next move. And we have BAH calculators and blog articles, everything from moving your vehicle OCONUS to how to deal with a road trip with a couple of kids. We've got it over at PCSgrades.com, so head on over there, but wait until after the webinar because it's going to be a good one. Last but certainly not least, I say this and modify it every week because, like military life, this changes too. Keep doing your part, people. Keep doing your part. We've got to flatten that curve. We have got to flatten that curve. This Delta variant is coming up. It's going down. It's going over here. It's going over there. People are talking mask mandates again. No matter where you're at, follow those mandates. Be vigilant, wear your mask if you have to, social distance if you can. We don't need Murphy, we've got enough of them, because when we flatten that curve, we flatten Murphy with it. Do you hear us, Murphy? We are coming for you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to tell us a little bit about herself. Michelle?
I agree with you 100%, MJ, by the way, as far as doing our part, because, you know, we represent a lot of the EFMP families, the Exceptional Family Member Program, families who have special needs. And so we need to think about the entire community and, you know, it would be especially difficult for them, you know, to deal with some of these medical issues. So anyway, thank you for that intro. Michelle Norman, Executive Director of Partners in Promise. Navy spouse for over 25 years, and I have two wonderful children. One of them is my daughter, who was the inspiration behind our organization. She has over 21 medical diagnoses, and when we finally got through some of the medical issues, we started running into education challenges as we moved, you know, 8 and 9 more times together as a family. And we're basically here to be a voice for the EFMP families, particularly looking at special education. We're elevating their voices, we're amplifying the resources and educating them of what's available to them. But we're also advising some of our military service organizations, DoD, legislators, other government officials that are in the position to make change, to help our families access an appropriate education, no matter where they are in this military lifestyle. Because we know that there's some high pain points when you move from school to school, state to state. And so our organization is here to kind of help our families ensure that they receive the same education that our peers can. So thank you, MJ, for the lovely intro to Partners in Promise.
Oh, I was on mute. See, I was doing so good. Michelle, you don't even understand. I did like 3 in a row where I was no mute. Oh my gosh. Yes.
You're here. It's good.
Here I am. Well, we're so glad to have you. And just for the record, people, you know, a lot of people, when we talk about EFMP, you might think to yourself, well, I'm not EFMP. My children are not EFMP. We are all, most literally, a breath away from disability. So what is true today may not be true tomorrow. Also, it's entirely possible that you yourself know an EFMP family who could benefit from this information. Go ahead and tag them in the comments. Let them know this is great information for them to have, especially for our PCSing families this year, because, oh, my goodness.
So what a year.
Yeah.
What a year, right?
Bump this year. All right.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right in, Michelle. You ready?
Let's do it, girl.
All right. So when school restarted, you know, in August, September timeframe this past year, we saw some schools go back full time, right, in person. Some schools stayed virtual till the spring or did some sort of a hybrid. With all of these mix of options that are out there, and we're out there, how is this impacting our families who are PCSing? Like, what kind of challenges do our kids face who are going from in-person to hybrid and et cetera?
It's crazy, isn't it? You know, because again, we just talked about how it's so different from state to state. I will say straight up, you know, the last year and a half has been an incredible, difficult time for military families. You know, of course, I'm going to focus more on the EFMP families, but in general, you know, for all of our military families, it's hard, you know, especially if you're moving mid-year, you're moving from, let's say you're in California, you're all virtual, you're moving to Florida, who's been open the entire time, you know, so these kids are feeling behind. They're feeling like they need to play catch up. It's been very difficult. Now you take that situation and you amplify it for our kids with special needs. You know, many of our kids thrive. We've talked about this more about routine and structure. You know, and, you know, there's been a lot of reports and surveys out during COVID, and you'll find that 20% of them, you know, basically felt like virtual learning was going okay. 20%. What about the other 80%? You know, our kids, most of them have individualized education programs, which we call IEPs. And it's like a roadmap of very specific services and supports that these kids need to be able to access, you know, an education. And when I say access, a Chromebook is not going to be accessing an education for most of our kids. You know, sometimes it is a teacher in the room that provides assistance or a one-on-one aid. It could be a very specific support that, you know, maybe someone who is hard of hearing or, you know, has eyesight issues, or, you know, it could be a number of things to keep someone on task. You know, those things were missing from that past year and a half for those kids. So what are you going to see? You know, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there has been lost instruction, you know, that are mandated within that IEP. Regression, you know, a lot of these kiddos, you know, may have had a skill that they just recently attained. And then you go into virtual and they're not receiving maybe some of those therapies that they were getting in person. Because let's face it, you really can't replace that in-school learning. I will caveat, there have been some students that did thrive or did well. I don't know if thrive is a great word, but did well, you know, in this virtual environment. And what we have seen and what has been reported is mostly, you know, families that do have children that perhaps have a little bit of anxiety, social anxiety. They're just worried about being somewhere on time or getting homework done on time. I think that maybe that virtual aspect was good for them. So I will say that, you know, not all kids, you know, had a difficult time with that, but I would say the majority of them did have some type of regression and lost instruction. So it's difficult, and then of course, oh, by the way, throw in a PCS, right?
Because why not?
Why not? Because we know they're moving. According to our survey that we conducted last year, over 90% of our EFMP families are moving. And we do know also once we move that there's always a lag in those services when they get to that new location. Almost 70% of them do not have those services in place on day one. It could take up to like 3 or 4 months. And so again, that lost time, each and every time you move, it just compounds every time, because by the time you may be figuring it out, you're moving again. So it's been difficult, and there's been some great things, that the federal government has done. They had the CARES Act, which pumped a lot of money into school districts, which is fantastic. But, again, one of the things that, some schools are doing, sorry that we're moving on to other things, but they're doing recovery service plans or compensatory services plans. So basically they're recognizing, hey, you didn't receive speech therapy like you were supposed to, for 4 months. So let's sit down and talk, about what the needs are of this child and what they've lost. So a lot of families were negotiating these compensatory services, compensatory education or recovery services, whatever they call it in that state, which is all fine and dandy. But then you get you find out you're PCSing that summer, because most folks want to do it in the summertime. And then guess what? You leave, go to a new state. There's no obligation by that new school district to give any of those services that you just, negotiated, because it could have been that they were open the entire time. Not my fault that you didn't get, XYZ speech. And so it's unfortunate because it puts, military families at a disadvantage. And so this year has just been very difficult, but I think that the more we can educate our families on what they can do on the front end to help them as a PCS, will help them not only get those services that they're supposed to get based on the needs of that child, based on their disability, then they'll be able to be better prepared as we continue on this military lifestyle, making sure they have all their documentation, all their data, how to best advocate for their child to ensure that they can have the access, that free, appropriate public education every time they move. And so it's been a year. It's been a year.
That seems to be like the phrase of the day. It's really been a year. That's the next hashtag. The next year's always supposed to be better. No pressure, 2022, no. But yeah, no, I mean, like I was just talking about this with a friend. I mean, like not only do you have to spend all this time renegotiating all of the things that you already had accommodations for your kiddo, but now what they see as appropriate may not mimic the accommodations that they may have thrived under before. And that's just, I mean, apples, it's not apples and oranges. It's apples and apples. What worked there could work here. So why don't you just go ahead and give me a shot? How about that?
But you're absolutely right on that, MJ. I think that, when we tell people what they're PCSing, first of all, we'll talk some about tips and tricks, right? You need to get as much information about that child before you move to your next PCS station, right? Like obviously you're going to get that IEP, you're going to get the report card like everybody does, but dig a little deeper, and it does. It unfortunately, it goes back on the family, the military spouse, to kind of collect this information. But hey, what are some classroom observations that you're seeing with my child? Do you have a teacher's notebook? How can I get some of that information? There's this wonderful, federal law for FERPA. And of course, don't ask me what all the acronym is for FERPA, but you can actually get the summative data, observation data for your child before you move. And so then, the first thing is to get that IEP in the hands of the next school district. And that's one thing that we're advocating at Partners in Promise for, is that advanced enrollment, make sure they have it and that they can actually look at it and assess what the needs are and the supports of that family. Because many times they won't even look at that IEP until you're officially registered. And I know that there's been a lot of states that say, oh, we do advanced enrollment, but sometimes the school districts don't even know that they're supposed to allow you to enroll beforehand. I've heard many instances here in Virginia where families had to print out the MIC-3 agreement, like, yeah, you are supposed to be allowed to, advance enroll. And the school districts were like, yeah, oh, well, I still need to have that lease and I still need to have that gas bill. And so it's very frustrating for our families to have to be so proactive, but be proactive. get those IEPs in their hands so they can start to get to know your child. They know exactly what needs, services, supports that they have in that IEP. So on day one, they're ready to rock and roll. It's really like a win-win is the way I look at it. Like everybody knows what child is coming in and what they need, because you don't want to see that gap of services. It could be, again, special ed transportation. Perhaps your child has epilepsy and you need an aid on that bus. That's kind of a big deal. That's not something you want to go 3 or 4 months without, but it's happened. And so we need to try to, be on the proactive side, reach out to those school districts and tell them about your child. And then, of course, another thing that we find that's really important right now is evaluations and data on our kids. There was a long time where we were asking our families to kind of collect that data at home. Like, how's that working for them? Or, what are the behaviors that you're seeing? How are they doing on some of those progress goals that you have in the IEP? So basically the parent was like the teacher. So there's a lot of evaluations are probably out of date. And, you can get these evaluations done yearly. You don't have to wait for that triennial every 3 years.
Yes,
that's
was
so
something
important.
I did that. Like, I thought, okay, so he'll be like, this is his baseline, and okay, in 3 years we'll reevaluate. But sometimes by the time that 3-year mark hits, what if he hasn't made progress and something could have been changed in the middle?
Exactly. And, I would say COVID's a pretty big deal on how it impacted our kids. And so there's no reason to wait. So get out those evaluations. When's the last time that OT was done, or that neuropsych done, or speech therapy, evaluation done? Check those dates, because that may be a good way to start off the school. You're like, hey, we're here, we're new. These were, based on my child's disability, these were the needs that we have recognized throughout the years. But you know what? There may be some changes. Maybe this particular goal we didn't see much progress with last year. Let's get some updated evaluations. And I think, again, that's good for the family. You can see where your child is, and then make sure that you have all the supports necessary, to help that child move forward. You don't want to waste time. I think that's the biggest thing for military families is we don't have a lot of time. So like from day one, get those meetings, in order, get those evaluations done. And, I think that's a good way to kind of just assess where our kids are and if they've struggled or if they've regressed, in this past year and a half. That's kind of a big deal.
Let's talk about that for a second. With some parents, okay, so with some parents who feel, maybe their child was left behind. And there are others who feel that the school's gone out of their way to make sure that they weren't left behind. There are a lot of concerns on how those schools should be handling those needs. So what can a parent do if their kid feels like they're left behind?
Well, the first thing is to call an IEP meeting. If they have an IEP, you need to get the team together, because really it is a team, decision. Of course, the parent has a very important role in that, but you need to document all of the concerns that you have. If you feel your child's behind, what is the data behind it? Is it homework that's coming home? Is it a state, like SOLs in Virginia? Did you show that there was a slide, in district testing that's done on a quarterly basis? Data drives supports and services. So, and we're a data-driven organization too. Like, those numbers mean everything. And it's not emotional. You can come to the table and say, here you go. And by the way, progress, this is, measurable goals, and here was the data. And no, this really wasn't a mastery of this goal, or this is not sufficient progress. Data is everything. And so keep all of those records and bring it to the table. And those evaluations that I just spoke about is very important. When you do neuropsychs, there are multiple tests within neuropsychs that can talk about, where the cognitive functioning is, the executive functioning, you name it, it's being looked at. And you can see the progress or the changes from, every 3 years, or if you maybe do it every 2 years. That should help you a little bit on determining where those strengths and weaknesses are of your child. And so that's where I would say, come to the table, work as a team as best as you can, and partner, and bring those concerns. And again, document. I always, I feel like I'm like a broken record about that, but there's so many times that, Sally Joe's mom's walking down the hallway at school, and a teacher pulls them to the side and said, hey, I've been noticing this or that. And they're like, that's great. But go home, write an email and say, it was so great to see you in the hallway today, this afternoon at 4 p.m. And you had discussed XYZ with me. And I agree with you. And I think maybe it's a good idea that we can do an evaluation to address this XYZ behavior. It's important to kind of document everything. Or if you even get a phone call, same thing, or just let it go to voicemail. I think it's sometimes where that information's lost, between the different experts on the IEP team. So I definitely would say, get in touch with your team. Make sure they know who your child is. I know that when Marissa was younger, we used to have an all about me, like one pager, and it was a picture of her and it talks about her likes or dislikes. But then also I talked about what her strengths were and where she needed help, because a lot of times you would hope everyone has a chance to see that IEP. No, sometimes it could be like you have your first meeting and they're like, oh, this is the first time I've seen the IEP on Sally Joe. And you're like, oh my gosh, what's been happening for 3 weeks? And so, sometimes on their younger years, and it's probably kind of embarrassing to do that when they're a little bit older, in middle school, in high school, but in their younger years, sometimes it's nice to have a one-page PDF that kind of talks about important parts of the IEP that teacher can look over very briefly and go, okay, I didn't have a chance to go over the 20-page IEP, but at least this gives me an idea of what this child's like, because we're trying to work together to, help our children, and I do know that there's amazing staff and teachers out there that are doing their very, very best. And so we're just trying to help them along, but also making sure our parents know what their rights are so they can feel empowered to speak up about, special education law, or where they feel that some areas are not being addressed. And so that's where we kind of come in with the resources and the educating that we do of our families, and to feel like they have a voice. A lot of times when I was first speaking up about special education, there really wasn't a lot of people talking about it because there's a little bit of a stigma, which we'll talk about a little bit later. If someone's speaking up saying, my child does need extra help, it's maybe not something that military families like to talk about. But, once you start, talking, other people can say, yes, that's me. You're telling my story. And so together we're stronger. And that's where we found a lot of momentum with Partners in Promise over this past year. We've got an amazing team, and we're data driven. I'll talk a little bit about, Jennifer, our COO, who's spearheading our next survey. And, those surveys, that data drives change. Last year's NDAA, we got those special education attorneys in there. What an amazing resource for our families if they're running into problems, to be able to go back to their service branch, installation and, contact their EFMP office. And of course, it depends on the branch, but, that's a good starting point to say, I need some help. I know, for instance, the Navy, we have 2 pilot programs in San Diego and also here in Hampton Roads. We have case liaisons who will actually attend an IEP meeting with you. They have the basic of basic special ed, background, but at least they can go to a meeting. And that is such a big deal when you're a stressed out parent and you just moved somewhere. Maybe your spouse is already deployed in certain training away from home. It can be intimidating when there's 17 people around a table and then there's just you. So having someone just there, is kind of like to make sure that you're staying in what you're saying and you can talk to them before and after is such a beautiful thing. And so there are resources out there, and I'm so proud of where all the service branches are going in that direction. And of course, EFMP standardization is another big topic. That is something that was talked about over a decade ago, and again, was authorized in last year's NDAA. And we're seeing great movement in all of the service branches towards that. So
let me just say, I want to speak to that for just a second. So sure. Why is that a big deal? So I'm going to say why that's a big deal. Why is it a big deal to align each and every service branch with the with EFMP? Okay. So if my husband is Marine Corps, which he is, yet kill Semper Fi, and we end up, let's say, at an Army base, the services that my child might need are not going to change just because we're on somebody else's base, okay? So the premise is they still need resources. The resources can be comparable, but literally something as simple as a form to even apply for EFMP, right? Is different across the services. So we've heard stories about, Air Force spouse and getting her kid enrolled into EFMP at Fort Bragg, for instance, or mostly an Army base, but they've got other people from other branches. They bleed a little bit of purple. And, they weren't able to secure services. They had to jump through hoops only to get any headway about a month before they PCS. So that's
It's
why it's
unfortunate.
kind of standardize.
Absolutely, because we're going more joint. And I also think about those who are in recruiting stations that are not anywhere near, really an installation that could be, maybe a couple of hours away. They can't just hop into the EFMP office and say, hey, here I am, but I know that, you're Air Force and I'm Navy, and it's not right. It shouldn't matter where you are. You should have access to EFMP resources no matter what. And so that's a big deal, and some of them are doing it really well. The Marine Corps has always been one of those ahead of everyone. They're a smaller service, but they're doing it great. Everything's kind of all located, in one location, but I can say for like Navy, it's in 3 different places. You've got, Navy Personnel Command in Tennessee. You've got BUMED in 2 locations. You got CNIC in the Washington Navy Yard. So the way they coordinate is has been working, I suppose, but it's not maybe the best. It's not as efficient as it could be. And so I know all the services have really been working on that. I think the Air Force actually has started working on, doing one central voice for EFMP even prior, before the NDA was signed. And it just takes time. It's a lot of processes, but, sometimes you need a little bit of a poke, and I think this is a good one with the NDAA, because unfortunately the families, they're the ones who fall between, the cracks. With that respite care, getting health care wherever they are, all the basic things that every military family needs, but it's so much more critical when you have a child with special needs, or even an adult within the EFMP program as well. We cannot afford those gaps in education or medical care, because it really it could be a life or death situation. So I'm really happy that that was put into the NDAA. The respite care also standardizing that, because some branches only have 16 hours of respite care, some have 40. I'm like, why are we not all the same? Everyone should recognize how important caregiving is, and the mental health of these families. Respite care is got to be up there in the top concern that needs to be well funded. I know for sure we would not still be in the Navy without respite care. When my husband was selected for this new position, first thing I did, I called back to my old respite care provider in Norfolk, and I said, can you take us back if we come back to the area? And she's like, yes. I'm like, all right, we'll say yes to the job. Seriously, if I did not have respite care, we would not be where we are today. So big fan of that program, and it helps me take care of myself as I take care of 2 kids that do take a lot of my time and energy. So yeah, standardization is huge, and that's really where we see a lot of that change is the NDAA. And that's where, we feel like we have built good relationships with those who can make these decisions, partnering. That's why that's part of our name, Partners in Promise, protecting the rights of military children in special education. We just love those little acronyms, but that really is the key, right? As far as working together. I do know that when we started, though, we knew that we had a little bit of a niche. Not really, there weren't a lot of folks looking at special education. When people were thinking EFMP, they're only thinking medical. So that's where we kind of set ourselves a little bit apart, because we are focused on the education piece. And of course, my daughter was the inspiration. We had a lot of legal problems when we moved here in 2014. And it went on for many years. So, I think it was like probably 5 years worth of, state complaints and due process administrative hearings, 2 of them. And we're very fortunate to win in all of those decisions, but it took a lot of effort. It took a mental health toll on me. Financially, it was very, very difficult. And I think about how we were so blessed to have friends and be able to tap into those resources. But, our enlisted families can't do that. And so bulking up, these EFMB offices with those special ed resources and support with attorneys, advocates, liaisons, whatever it takes, that will make it so much more easier for that service member, right, to focus on their job, because we know this impacts that military readiness and the retention of our families. And if we can do what the Marine Corps did when they did their study a decade ago, and they're like, yep, let's go ahead and bump up EFMP, let's add more case managers, let's get those attorneys on both coasts. Their data shows that they stay in longer, they're happier, in their position. And I think that overall, their career progression has worked its way up. So again, we know there's leaders out there that are in the EFMP program. That's another thing we're working on. We have to lift and amplify those voices of those successful families who've been in EFMP for X amount of years and say, hey, it's worked for me. EFMP was great. And it allowed me to be able to serve, but it took care of my family. And so we're hoping to also amplify those voices within the different service branches, like, hey, let's reduce that stigma and talk about EFMP and how it's a great resource. And it's going to benefit everyone in our military community, maybe not just you, but even your neighbors, your fellow sailor, whatever. It's important, to holistically look at our families and make sure they're taken care of.
No, for sure. And again, that holistic approach, like,
yeah.
Let's say my husband changed services. My kid's still going to have the same needs that they did when he was a Marine, right? I'm just saying.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
Some of it you would think is common sense, but at the same time, like, you ever hear the term, oh, I love this. I just told somebody this the other day. You know that term red tape? You ever hear that term? The red tape, right? Bureaucratic red tape. The reason there is such a thing as red tape is because when veterans, way back in the day used to go and try and get their file, it would literally be bound in red tape. Legit. So, veterans,
I did not know that.
The trends. Yes, you're welcome. Just in case you yourself are ever on jeopardy.
That is awesome. Yep. That is very, very awesome. I had no idea. But, it's true, though. We talk about the frozen middle a lot. Like, you have these great ideas, but honestly, getting through the middle is the hard part. So sometimes you have to start from the top down, and that's where we've had our most success, is really looking at top-down solutions on how we can affect as many families as possible versus trying to move from here up, go from here down. And so far, it's been a pretty good matrix for us. So we're thrilled. And of course, I'm going to have to plug in our survey. That's going to be launching very soon, September the 7th. And it has been, I cannot be thankful enough for Jennifer for spearheading it, because it's going to be fantastic. It has been really the driver for so many changes that we've seen as an organization for EFMP. And I will just say, please, everyone, share, because the more we hear your voices and your experiences, the more that we can take that back to Congress and say, okay, we have these many families, experiencing this issue. And there's a couple of areas that we're going to deep dive in this year. Last year we looked at who was filing complaints. Well, now we want to know, why are people not filing complaints? Because we know that not everyone was satisfied with their education for their child. But what are the reasons that they're not doing it? And it's going to be very interesting, because some people are like, it's not worth my time, or I'm moving, or, there's stigma. There's all sorts of things.
Or they've been through that survey to death. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true too.
The survey fatigue, I believe it is called. But
yeah.
Let's talk about that voice factor. I'm skipping around. Obviously, you have the same.
I love it.
But we're skipping around because it just makes sense. So when we talk about, like you mentioned, tell us your stories, because you add that the stories plus the data equals potential change, right? Like, that's the stuff that you take. You need to marry them and that's what you bring to the decision makers, right? So that story component is very, very important. Where can a family go to tell their story to you?
Well, first of all, I would say reach out to us at our website, thepromiseact.org. But can I say that our motto is, we love data, but stories complete us. And thanks, Jen. I think she put that out there on our website. Ain't that the truth, though? It is really how we began, was telling our stories together. And it started with me, then 4 other gals, our founders, and then our team has blossomed to an amazing, kind of folks, all military spouses. And that's really how it started. And so come check us out. And there are definitely some areas in there that says, stay in touch with us. And then, do you want to share your story? And so, or email us at info@partnersandpromise.org. We love that, and we do have regular webinars and blogs that folks can come to us with their stories. And, again, keep in mind that we don't want just people complaining, right? Because that's not who we are. Every time that we have presented or done webinars, we always have that solution to go with it. Like, okay, here is what happened to me, but you know what? This could have been resolved if we did this, so this might be a good consideration, if we're going to be changing something within this program. this is what I would suggest. And so that's kind of how we kind of, approach things, is just don't come and complain, but let's think about how we can solve it together. Because that's really what those change makers want to hear. They don't want to hear just a story. They want to hear, how do I fix it? Well, great. Here's how you fix it. A, B, C, D.
You know what? That's
and you just
something
made someone's life easier.
I mean, like, honestly, you want to see change, like, especially if you're talking to somebody about something you have no real foundation on, like, you just educated them and now you're like, okay, can you do something about it? They're like, I just learned about this thing. So coming armed with a solution at the table, okay, this is the one time where I have no problems breaking it down Barney style for somebody and giving them the answer to the quiz, because it ultimately assists all of the people that I'm working for. In addition to educating, I'm going to provide you a solution. And my husband and his career in the military has taught me one thing, and I've taken this to every job. When you have a problem, okay, our service members are not going to go to their CO and say, sir, I have a problem.
Right.
Ma'am, I have a problem. Because they're going to be like, and why isn't it taken care of? You know what I mean? So instead, they do one of two things. They either say, hey, there was a problem, but I totally took care of it. Or, hey, there was a problem, or there is a problem. It's being handled. Do you have any suggestions? But I've got it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Either way, like, but present it here. Here are the solutions that I have that I'm bringing to the table. Which one do you want? And then if you don't have that person to go to, you can say, here are all the solutions. Pick one. When you go to Congress, do the same thing.
It's kind of like that bluff, right? Bottom line up front, whenever you do an email, it's like, boom, here it is. Because I know you're really, really busy. You don't have a lot of time, but I'm just kind of tell you what you need to know. And that's exactly how we kind of approach things as well. So I would say, folks, get in touch with us. We are stronger together, and we've gotten a lot of interesting inquiries lately. I will share that, we've heard a lot from our National Guard families who are having some problems. The great thing is that we are the founding organization for the EFMP Coalition, which is made up of 5 different organizations that focus straight on EFMP families, because we knew together, if we're all focused on EFMP, that we would be able to amplify our families' voices even more. And we could kind of get together on issue papers, or, just be able to get ourselves at the table more often if we come together as an EFMP coalition. And so that was one of the things that we brought up. Obviously right now the autism demo program is a big deal for a lot of our families who there's been a lot of changes that DHA has implemented and recommended to be going into effect this next year. That's been a lot of problems, for those who rely on ABA therapy. And so even though that's not our expertise at at Partners in Promise, we know that the EFM organization that's in the EFMP coalition is. And so that's the great thing about being a part of the coalition, is that you can pass things through to other people. And, again, just amplifying as much as we can, and making sure that, when someone does have a problem, we know who to get it to. And so the EFMP coalition has been a fantastic thing. So we have the Modern Military Association of America. We've got the Military Special Needs Network, which they have thousands of people on their Facebook page. The Exceptional Families of the Military, and then the Military Kids Special Education Alliance. So all of us are very, focused on the EFMP thing, because there's a lot of amazing organizations in our MSO community. But let's face it, they don't have to be experts everywhere. Let us be the experts, and we'll be able to kind of elevate the voices and figure out, well, gosh, someone else is already working on that. Why are we all spinning our wheels when we could be doing that together? So I think that was a huge deal for us. Thank you, Mary. As far as this past year, that really was exciting for us to kind of get that started. And, it's amazing that when people need quotes and some type of opinion on some major movement, they know who to go to, and we're able to give that expertise back. So it's been a great thing for us. Great stuff. Yeah. And we didn't talk about the podcast either.
That's what I was just going to say. Okay. So you got to talk about, so this, first of all, people, this survey starts September 7th?
September the 7th. It's going to go through October the 8th, I think.
So a whole month. So
one
expect
whole
that
month.
to be put on blast.
Yes, we have to put this on blast. Each year we have doubled how many people we've reached, but we really want to get pretty high up this year. And we have partnered with Ohio State University with this survey. And so it has gone through all the wickets it needs to go through. So it's amazing. Jennifer's done a fantastic job on it. And I think we're going to get some really good data that will help us with some further advocating next year. So it's going to be very exciting. But please share.
I'm very excited about the survey. I just have one small caveat. This is probably going to be the only time that I say this out loud and publicly. So I'm from Michigan. Okay. I'm a Michigan Spartan fan. My husband's a Wolverine.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Sorry.
So we've got this Ohio State, these Buckeyes, right? Sorry. So this is the one time where I'm going to give Ohio State a shout out, and I'm trying very hard to smile. So this is an amazing thing.
I'm going to write this down.
Yeah.
1:41 p.m. July the 28th.
It is a moment in history, literally.
That is funny. No. That's funny that you mentioned that, because we did talk to one of our legislators, and he was he from Wisconsin or Michigan? Maybe it was Michigan. I can't remember. He said the exact same thing. I'm like, come on, people.
It's
but again, I'm the same way. Like, if someone talks about Oklahoma, I'm from Texas, and so I'm like,
Boomer Center.
Yeah, okay.
That's my second. Sorry. Never been to Oklahoma.
I know. I'm like.
Anyway, and then so this
podcast.
You guys have a podcast now. What's that? What's that about?
I know. Isn't that wild? You know, I think it's, again, just reaching out to our audience and giving them different modes of ideas on what we do, not just in special education, but like within our military community. And so, again, Jennifer is our host for this, and the name of it is Disruptive Storytelling with Military Changemakers. And our first season's military stigma, by the way, tough conversations worth having. So what really brought about this, is our survey. Our survey kind of showed, why are people not enrolling in EFMP? And there was a lot of stigma. Like, people were reluctant to come forward, and we knew we kind of needed to dig a little deeper. Like, what's going on here? You have senior leaders, or people that have kind of been in the career for a long time not enrolling, or maybe they enrolled for one child, but not for the other. And then we also had a really interesting interview with Dr. Katz, who's a psychologist here in Virginia Beach, and he serves the special ops community. And just listening to him and knowing that the people that he serves, many of them would not enroll in EFMP as well. And it really came down to the fact that they wanted to preserve their children's right to enlist in the military, because a lot of them are, have ADHD. As you can imagine, the special ops community, you might need a little bit of that. And so they are very reluctant to enroll and have that information in their medical records. And so many different things. And it's amazing how they all intersect with each other. But we know, just with the work that we've done in special education, that you have to have tough conversations. Like I said, when we first started about special ed, everyone's like, everything's great with our military kids. I'm like, not really. But let's dig. And no one really wanted to dig as much. And of course, special ed is very complex too. You really have to know what you're doing. And we're fortunate to have, 6 trained special ed advocates. We have an attorney in special ed. We've got, all the expertise that we think we can to be able to make these issues known to our legislators. But, there's just a lot of areas that we thought from our survey that we can go a little bit deeper. And so some of these tough conversations, not only just the stigma of special ed and EFMP, but also some other things that are affecting our military community. We're talking about race, talk about, those who served through the do not do tell.
Don't ask, LGBTQ. Don't tell, yeah.
Thank you. Those type things. There's a gal who's a military spouse, but also was active duty, and how that's changed as far as like, oh, now you're just a spouse. And so there are definitely some areas that we're just talking, and hopefully through these difficult conversations, people can learn about what other people are dealing with in the military community, but then also bring those solutions, right? Like, again, let's talk about these uncomfortable conversations, but then also maybe we can come away with some top level solutions just from listening and being able to understand really what those challenges are. So we're looking forward to it this first season, and no, it's not going to be like all laughs and having a great time. It's going to be some serious stuff, but we thought if anyone could probably pull it off, because we're used to doing that already, then we thought we might be a good organization to start. So I'm excited about it. And I think our first one just went live yesterday. So I think that there's a link to, yep, there's the link that you can subscribe to it. We're excited. And so if anyone has a stigma story that they would love to share with us, please contact us again, info@partnersinpromise.org. We would love to hear it. If you'd want to be on our podcast, this may be a great way to do it. Again, if you want to write a blog, some people want to be anonymous with their, I know we had one a few weeks ago of an active duty service member who wrote about his situation in Kansas. And so he kept it anonymous, and how it affected the readiness of his family when they were having special ed problems. And so again, we're here just to kind of amplify those voices and kind of come up with ideas on how to make things easier for our families. It's already tough enough to be a parent of a kid with special needs. We're already kind of overburdened, overstressed, and kind of drowning a little bit. And so any bit we can do to help is great.
Awesome. And so before we head out, what if you could just kind of, for our families who are PCSing, like we do, whether you're EFMP or not, literally this is important. I'm just thinking about people like Dustin. Shout out Dustin.
Hey, Dustin.
She is one of our regulars. She's been watching like crazy. She is literally prepping for load day tomorrow. Hashtag not enough. We're with you, Dustin. But for people like Dustin who are literally getting ready to make this PCS in this, it's been a year. What advice would you have for those families to kind of assist their kids with the transition into a new school, a new environment, especially our EFMP kids as well?
So I think the first thing that our families need to know is your voice is so critical this year. Like, this is the year. Like, if you're going to get back on track, it has to be like now. And so don't be afraid to be the mama bear this year, because I think that's gonna set the tone, for how things might go for the rest of the year. That you're invested in your child's education. Get that IEP quickly as possible to that next school, like ASAP. And find out what the state reg is. Do they have advanced enrollment? Most of them do. They just kind of vary a little bit. And whether or not they're implemented the way they should be is a different story. But get that IEP ASAP, because really it's a win-win for everyone. They know you're coming, and if you have any other records before you leave, the current school district, get them. Even if it's a letter from the teacher saying, I had Sally Joe this year. She did really great. These are some things that I did with her that seemed to help out. These are things that didn't work out. Just having a letter, because sometimes there's not a lot of communication going on between the receiving and sending school districts. So definitely get that information out there. Check those evaluations. I think that's super important. When's the last time they had those evaluations? Has it been more than 3 years? Oh my goodness. Time to come to the table for that first IP and said, a lot of changes happened. These are the type of evaluations I think that my child needs, and it's, been way overdue. And so get on it and make sure that they do it in the timing that they're supposed to do it. Because there are certain state regs that those evaluations have to be completed. So stay on top of it. And ask about compensatory services. If you're still staying in your same school district and your child missed services, and if you haven't asked for compensatory services, get a meeting together. Go ask about it. Say, I know my kid missed, and we know that they've had some regression. Let's come up with a plan on how, we can make up for some of this. It could be that maybe they increase the frequency of, let's say, speech from like 2 days a week to 5 days a week. I know it sounds crazy, but think out of the box, because sometimes we're like, oh, it can only be in the summer. No, compensatory service can be done in all sorts of ways. It could be done over Christmas break. It could be done over the weekend. It could be done anywhere. No one says it has to be over the summer, which is when we're all PCSing typically. So no, think out of the box. There are definitely times where you can do that. And there's some good resources online too about that. Take our survey. Let us know what your issues are so that we can advocate for you. That's the biggest thing I can say, is just keep feeding that information to us, because we're watching, we're listening, and we're here to help. And of course, also come and download our podcast so that we can still keep these conversations going. But that's the biggest thing. Communication, partner as best you can with those school districts, whatever you can do to ensure that your child can receive an appropriate public education.
Yes.
You got this.
We all
Mama
deserve
bear.
a faith.
Exactly. That's right.
I like to, by the way, yes. So I am a mama bear, and I'm also super excited because I am also a Mimi bear.
That's right.
She's come out once or twice. Much, much harder to rein in than Mama Bear. Write it down.
Good on
yes.
you.
Yes. See, even yes, Dustin. Yes, Dustin. Yes. Love it. Love it. Okay. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on today. We really, really appreciate it. And again, to all of you who are watching, you might not be EFMP, but I can guarantee you that you know a family who is, who does need this information. So please share it. Knowledge does nothing, just hanging out up here with nowhere to go. But also that we are literally all of us, every single one of us on this planet are a breath away from disability. Absolutely. It could happen to any of us. So just remember that. And now
1 in 5, right? 1 in 5 have a disability. And we know that there's less than that, like in the whole scheme of the military community, they're enrolled in EFMP. So why? Why are they not enrolled? That's what we're going to dig into in our survey.
Yes. And so before we go, I do want to make an announcement next week. Next week, Megan will be back August 4th, Wednesday. We have a pretty big webinar and you do not want to miss it because how do I say this without saying it? I'm going to vague book a little bit over here. You do not want to miss it because you are going to, it's mind blowing and you're going to walk away with something that you're going to want and see. And you're just going to want to be there. You're just going to want to tune in August 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern with me and Megan and some friends over from Shift Moving Company. You have to come over and talk to us. You have to watch. You have to put it on your calendar. Mark it down. It's happening. So until next week, this too shall PCS. Bye, everybody.
Bye.